Welcome back to the Midnight Narrator, where the line between ordinary and extraordinary often blurs in terrifying ways. Tonight, S story is a chilling reminder of how easily a seemingly simple job can turn into a nightmare. Get comfortable, hit the subscribe button, and join us as we unravel the twisted tale of the laundry sitter. "Excuse me," I replied, bewildered. $200 an hour, repeated Eleanor. "Right," I said. "But you said I'd be babysitting a—" No, I must have misheard. "Where's the child?" "Child?" Daniel chuckled. "We don't have children." "You heard me correctly, George. Just monitor the device for a few hours," Eleanor said. "That's all, isn't it, Daniel?" "Indeed, Eleanor," Daniel chuckled. "Honestly, this new generation, you'd think they could handle supervising a washing machine, wouldn't you?" "You would," Eleanor laughed. "Perhaps we should write it down for him." "He probably needs to be told through a TikTok video," Daniel said. The couple laughed, and I stifled the irritated sigh threatening to escape my lips. They were unbearable, but $200 an hour for babysitting was an incredible offer. It would have been incredible if I'd been paid that much to care for an actual person but a washing machine. Let them have their fun, I thought. I was sure I'd have the last laugh, and so I bit my tongue. "No," I said, smiling. "I think I've got it." "Good lad," Daniel said, ruffling my hair in a patronizing fashion. "May I take your coat?" I shrugged, but Daniel had already slipped it off my shoulders before I could respond. He disappeared upstairs, which seemed a little peculiar, given they had a coat rack by the door, but I didn't question it. "We'll see you at 11 o'clock, okay?" Eleanor asked. I nodded, waving as they left. I lifted a middle finger as soon as the door had shut behind them. I was about to make the easiest $800 of my life. Maybe more if they stay out longer, I thought. Daniel and Eleanor Vance had always been the oddballs on the street. Nobody really knew them, and despite their insistence to the contrary, I could have sworn they had kids, Thomas and Lily. Mom and Dad seemed to think not, which is why they were confused when the Vances offered me the babysitting job over the holiday break. When I found myself staring at a washing machine in their kitchen, I started to realize that my parents were probably right. There had never been a Thomas or a Lily, but I wasn't complaining about the bizarre request. As a broke college student, the thought of making eye-watering money in a single night had me salivating in seconds. As soon as the Vances popped round to make the offer, I rushed over to their house at the end of the street without another thought. Anyway, after that rude conversation with the Vances, I initially planned to not even bother babysitting the washing machine. But I was so glad I eventually peered through the oval window because I was treated to a sight of unexpected hilarity. A mountain of miniature outfits circled the rumbling drum. There must have been hundreds of items in there, all of them too small for any human to wear, and some were far more shrunken than others. It was a mismatched collection. Of course, they're washing doll clothing, I thought, laughing aloud. Absolute nut jobs. Of course, I immediately sent pictures to my friends. "No way," Johnny replied. "Those two are so weird. I can't believe you're not babysitting actual humans. Didn't we play with their kids when we were growing up?" Sarah asked. "That's what I said to my parents," I replied. "But they didn't think so, and Daniel and Eleanor said they don't have any children." "Oh, but they do," Johnny said. "Their beautiful baby washing machine." I snorted. "Also, I'm just thinking about the photos you sent," Johnny continued. "I think I recognize that teensy tiny t-shirt in the second picture, the one with the green turtle on it, see it? Oh my word, Thomas wore that." "Well, a larger version of that," Sarah messaged. "Yeah, that name rings a bell," Johnny said. My heart dropped. "Wait. Thomas? Okay, this is getting weird now. I was part joking about them having kids, but that's the exact name I had in my head." Before my friends could respond, the doorbell rang. The sudden ding startled me and my phone clattered to the tiles below, screen shattering dramatically. I groaned. Of course. I scooped up my wounded technological device, sighed at the shattered screen, and placed the fallen soldier on the dining table. I stormed to the front of the house, ready to scowl at whoever had unwittingly caused my phone's demise. But when I flung the door open, nobody was there. though I was certain I could hear a faint wailing sound in the wind, as if a distant scream were striving to capture my attention. With a heavy sigh, I closed the door and returned to the kitchen, frustrated that a sizable portion of the night ES earnings would be going towards fixing my phone screen. I squinted at the device's splintered screen, but it was useless. I couldn't read what my friends had replied. Suddenly, my attention diverted to an unusual noise from the washing machine's innards, a sound that was hard to distinguish, though it had some sort of subconscious effect on my body, lining my skin with a wave of goosebumps and upright hairs, much like the wailing wind at the front door. It sounded like a chorus of piercing shrieks. I knelt onto the kitchen tiles, sighing as my jeans pressed into shattered pieces of my phone screen, and stared deeply into the whirlpool of minuscule clothes which filled the washing machine. The rumble of the drum, the rustling of a tire, and the whooshes of water mostly drowned out the mysterious noise. But it was there. I hadn't imagined it. A choral pang of despair. And then I saw something which filled me with a terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A fleshy creature, half the size of a pinky finger, slithered between two items of clothing. I yelled and immediately fell backwards, unable to pinpoint what I had seen, but entirely certain it was no insect, no animal. I hurriedly smashed every button on the washing machine, desperate to end the cycle. I'm not sure why my instinct wasn't to run. My brain wasn't functioning correctly. I waited a few minutes for the water to drain from the drum, watching the still pile of tiny outfits. My body shook violently, anticipating movement from within the clothing, but there was nothing. No fleshy monstrosity pounced out at me. And then there came the dreaded ding to signify that the door was safe to open. The drenched pile of clothes sat motionlessly, and I spent several minutes summoning the courage to rummage through it. The never-ending piercing sound was louder now. It was a muffled noise coming from the bottom of the clothes pile. I scarcely dared to look. Shrunken garments slipped through my fingers, and it was only upon closer inspection that I came to a horrifying realization. The outfits were stained with blood and some sort of indistinguishable mush. I could feel the vomit rising in my mouth, but I was, as I uncovered the final layer of clothes at the bottom of the drum, that I finally unloaded the contents of my stomach. A graveyard of flesh lay against the drum. There were hundreds of shrunken bodies, horribly disfigured, bloodied, and mushed. But the worst part was that some of the miniaturized victims were still moving. The indiscernible peach-colored things were people, and the piercing choral sound was that of their screaming. One of the less mangled people began to crawl over the smaller mound of clothes ID created in the clearing. He was calling to me in a small, feeble voice. "Save us! Help!" he cried repeatedly. I watched in paralyzed fear, trying to decide whether it would be safe for me to reach the palm of my hand inside the drum to scoop out the few people still moving. The man who had wriggled free from the mound of bodies seemed wounded and helpless, but I was terrified of touching that horror scene. With a deep breath, I outstretched my hand, placing it palm side up on the clothes at the bottom. And as the tiny man, along with a few other survivors, clambered onto my skin, I tried to conceal the shivers that spread throughout my body. The first man continued to shout as I steadily lifted my hand closer to my ear. But I soon realized I'd misheard him the first time. Not save us, help. Save yourself. What's happening? I whispered weakly. What? Didn't you see Grace outside? The man screamed into my ear. My body shivered as I realized that must have been who rang the doorbell, the tiny voice I heard wailing in the wind. It doesn't matter now, just find your coat and get out of here, he screeched in a minute voice. Why do I need my coat? I asked, gulping. Because they'll shrink it to shrink you. I don't know how or why they do it, but it happened to all of us. I moved my hand to eye level, surveying the 6 survivors, 5 of whom were writhing on my palm. Only the main man seemed to be in any sort of fit state. Are you Thomas? I asked quietly. What? Oh, the boy. He sighed. No, the Vances put their children somewhere special. Never mind that. Come on, you need to find your coat. I looked at the clock on the wall. Relax, it's 8 o'clock. They're not getting back until 11. They never went anywhere, the man screamed. In a near-synchronized manner, the house's lights extinguished. Oh no, the small man whispered. They know. I'm getting out of here, I said, stumbling through the darkness. If you leave, that coat goes in the next cycle and you become like us, the man warned. Or worse, and I didn't need to question what he meant. I'd seen the pulverized bodies at the bottom of the drum. Given the inexplicable nature of the tiny human in the palm of my hand, I had reason to believe every last word he'd said. So I made my way across the darkened entryway, opened the front door, and placed the miniature figures on the paving slabs. Go, I said. I could hear faint, pained sounds from the ground, as the man said something inaudible to me before helping his injured companions. Then I stepped back into the lightless house, pulling out my shattered phone to use the flashlight. Thankfully, the screen still seemed to register my touch. Making my way up creaking stairs, the stillness of the house filled me with absolute terror, given I knew that the Vances were lurking somewhere within those four walls. And when I reached the upstairs landing, a door opened at the far end. A darkened bedroom beckoned. I knew it to be a trap, but I had no choice, according to the small man I had saved. Not that I could trust him either. Daniel. Lily, I called. I just want my coat, then I'll go. I stepped into a large, lightless children's room. There were 2 single beds and, most horrifyingly, a doll on each. Dolls that looked exactly like the 2 children I was completely certain I'd never imagined at all, Thomas and Lily. But they weren't dolls, and they weren't alive. They seemed to have been shrunken and stuffed. I threw up on the floor, and the light in the house suddenly returned, as Daniel and Eleanor entered the room through a side door. People are so weak these days, Daniel's voice growled. This generation sickens me. Eleanor sniffled. But not our children. They were pure. I cried. Why are you doing this to people? Why? Daniel frowned, frothing at the lips and brandishing my coat in his tight grip. To save our children, you ignorant fool. Your life will finally mean something. And seeing as you couldn't even wait for the next washing cycle, I guess we should head downstairs and start it now. You're insane? Save them? Your children are dead. Look at what you've done to them, I cried, gesturing at the doll-sized, pale-faced corpses in the beds. Eleanor shrieked. Quiet, you foul thing. We didn't kill them. This was the only way to save them. Save your energy, honey, Daniel said, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. It's his turn now. And there's no running for him or his escaped friends. We'll catch them. We always do. Heart pounding, an idea came to me. An idea so horrific that I didn't want to believe it had stemmed from my own brain. I stepped backwards and slammed the bedroom door closed. Then I turned on my heel and ran to the top of the stairs, ignoring the cackling sounds behind me. I scurried down the stairs 2 at a time and beelined for the coat stand by the door, scooping up 2 coats, one for Daniel and one for Eleanor. Hearing footsteps slowly plodding across the upstairs landing, I darted to the kitchen, realizing I had mere moments before I was caught. I threw the coats into the washing machine, ignoring the blood and guts within, and shut the door. It's useless, George, Daniel shouted, heading down the stairs. You won't find any weapons in this house, but you can run. Go for it. I pressed the start button and, in a stroke of genius, hammered the plastic handle off the door, preventing it from being opened. Daniel suddenly emerged in the kitchen doorway, coat in hand and frown on his face. What are you? He stopped mid-sentence and dropped the coat to the floor. No, Eleanor! I thought I might have to fight them off, allowing the cycle enough time to work its magic. But the horror commenced as soon as their coats began twirling in the running washing machine. As Daniel spun around in the doorway, his limbs began to crumple inwards, shrinking in a matter of seconds. He screamed in excruciating pain, as did Eleanor, who was still walking down the stairs. Parts of his skin tore and bled, as had been the case for most of the victims in the machine, and there sounded a series of thuds from the staircase. Daniel, mostly crippled and reduced to half of his size, ran out into the entryway and I followed him. No, Eleanor, Eleanor, he cried, cradling his shrinking wife who had tumbled to the floorboards and cracked her head open. What have you done? "You monster!" Daniel dropped his wife and turned his attention to me, charging with a furious glint in his eyes. I watched with a mixture of relief and horror as the man lunged forward, shrinking as he went, and fell at my feet, as a shriveled, pinky-sized, lifeless husk, wearing blood and guts on the outside of his corpse. I slumped to the floor of the entryway, eyeing the miniature corpses of the Vances, making sure they were truly dead. And then, after an unknown period of time, I hazily walked into the kitchen, poured a bottle of vodka across the dining table, and set it ablaze with a lighter. The fire spread quickly. As I was walking towards the open front door, I noticed Daniel's wallet on a dresser. There was $80 inside, not quite enough for a new phone screen, and certainly not enough compensation for the horror I endured. But it sufficed. I wasn't willing to spend a moment longer in that house. I stumbled out of the burning house, the flames licking at the edges of the porch as I fled down the street. I didn't look back. I didn't even stop to check on the tiny survivors I'd left on the pavement. I ran, my lungs burning, my legs heavy with the weight of the horror I'd witnessed. I didn't stop until I reached the park at the end of the street, collapsing onto a cold, damp bench. The fire at the Vance house cast an eerie orange glow across the night sky, illuminating the park with an unnatural light. I sat there for hours, shivering uncontrollably, the screams of the shrunken people echoing in my ears. The next morning I woke up on the bench, stiff and sore. The fire at the Vance house was still smoldering, smoke curling lazily into the morning air. The police were there, cordoning off the area. I watched from a distance, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. The news reporters arrived soon after, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrusting towards the bewildered neighbors. "Tragic accident," one neighbor muttered, shaking his head. "Such a lovely couple." I scoffed, pulling my coat tighter around me. Lovely couple? They were monsters. News of the fire spread quickly. The local paper ran a headline: "Mysterious fire engulfs Vance residence." The story mentioned the couple, their eccentric behavior, and the lack of any known children. No one mentioned the shrunken bodies. No one mentioned the screams. The police investigation dragged on for weeks. They ruled the fire an accident, a faulty electrical circuit. No bodies were ever found. I never went back to that street. I moved away, changed my number, and tried to forget the horrors I had witnessed. But the screams, the shrieks of the trapped, the desperate pleas for help, they haunted me every night. I never told anyone about the shrunken people. Who would believe me? I lived with the knowledge that the Vances had not been the only ones. There were others out there, trapped in a nightmare of their own making. And somewhere, out there, those tiny survivors were trying to rebuild their lives, their bodies forever changed, their trust in humanity shattered. And I, the only witness, was left to grapple with the horrifying truth, a silent guardian of a secret that would forever consume me. And that's it for tonight's tale, The Laundry Sitter. What do you think? Could you ever trust a job offer so strange? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as chilling as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another spine-tingling episode. This is the Midnight Narrator signing off. Until next time, remember, never let your laundry go unattended.